Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. All right, welcome back, everybody. Today, I am delighted to introduce to you Dr. Rob Orman, who is coming to us to talk about things related to sustainable medicine. Welcome, Rob. We'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sarah. Great to meet you. Great to be here and chatting with your listenership. So I am a full-time physician coach. I coach primarily emergency docs with some critical care and family medicine. But because I come from a background of emergency medicine, that is what I put out in the world. And so that's what comes back. And that's what I know the best and I'm most interested in.
Yeah.
And as a bit of background, I spent 20 years as an emergency physician in exclusively community emergency medicine. Some of that was teaching as well. About halfway through my career, I started to get very much involved in medical education, and that became my second career within medicine. I started to do more and more of that. And I started doing medical education full time. I had a podcast called Cast. I ran a show called EM Rap. I was a part of putting on the Essentials of Emergency Medicine conference. So I was really, really deep into that. And that became my full-time job. And I kind of phased out of clinical work and then kind of phased out of that education work and got into coaching, which now I've been doing for many years now. And maybe we'll get into how that came to be. But yeah, my day job is working with docs to get unstuck, unburnt, and I don't know if this is PG-13 or not, but just help them kick ass in their careers and just find joy in what they're doing. You know, we worked really hard to get that degree and might as well thrive while we're doing it and not just try to survive.
Yeah. I agree. We work really hard to get there. And we put off a lot of that satisfaction or joy or thriving in pursuit of it will get better when. Don't know if that's something you experienced.
Yeah, I recently spoke with a guy who wasn't not in medicine at all. We just recorded on trading careers on what that is. And you know, I think so often we think about trading careers of, oh, I need to go from being a doctor to being a stockbroker or a ski patrol or this big trade, but there's small trades within the career. You just, as maybe we'll talk about things that you do within your current job or switching locations so that it's more aligned to what your ideal job would be. Mm-hmm. And he had a great expression, which was, are you going to relive another yesterday? And that's what we get so used to doing. It's just, yeah, I'm reliving yesterday over and over and over again, hoping it's going to change, but not doing anything specific about it. I know that's what you and I both do is, well, let's get specific. Let's get granular and have agency and start making those changes.
Yeah. Tell us about your career. Did you always want to be an emerge doc or how did that all come about?
Totally not. At 100% no. I grew up in Ski Town in Colorado. And what I knew two kinds of doctors. I only thought there were two kinds. I thought there were orthopedic surgeons. Yes. And I thought there were emergency docs because those are the two that I encountered. And I honestly thought I was going to do ortho. And when I was going through my first and second year, that was my focus. And I remember we would have clinicians from different specialties come in and speak to our class. And someone came in from emergency medicine. I didn't really think much of it because I was just, I'm putting bones back together. Yeah. And when I was doing my clinical rotations, I found that, well, you and I both know that when you do clinical rotations, you go down to the emergency department regardless of what it is, whether it's surgery or
Hmm.
psychiatry, internal medicine, or orthopedics or OBGYN, you're always going down there. And I loved it. I loved when I went down there. And also the emergency attendings, or as you'd say in Canada, the emerge attendings,
Hmm.
always seemed happy to see me. And that, hey, you want to go sew up this guy? And wow, my gosh, yes, totally. And I felt like I was maybe this is a bit of imposterism, but I felt like it was a bit of a burden when I was up on the wards, which, there's just there's internal judgment, there's fear of judgment and failure,
Hmm.
and you're just getting so messed up. But every time I went to the ED, it just clicked. And it's like, I get this, I get them, they get me, I like the vibe.
Yeah.
And then I did an orthopedic. So that was an experience. I said, wait, something's going on here. I didn't even consider emergency medicine. And then I spent a lot of time doing orthopedics in the OR, and I just didn't love being in the OR.
Hmm.
I said, well, if I'm going to be doing this as a career, I need to love this.
Yes.
Granted, in retrospect, maybe I could have had a different approach and a different mindset, prepared for surgeries differently, and not been trying to impress so much as to learn. I might
Mhm.
have had a different experience, but alas, I ended up going into emergency medicine instead of orthopedics.
Okay, got it. All right. So we had a career switch, which is or I guess a goals switch somewhere in there towards emerge. Tell us about then the emergency department experience, because it would have gone from this occasional vibing place to now you're in the thick of it.
I mean, as far as in medical
Work,
school, or
working in the emerge. So as you came kind of into that emergency department as a resident or as an attending, what was it like?
well, it was like a lot of things. But I want to get into something very specific with that,
Mm,
and which I think is and I wonder how this will land with you, but I think is kind of a failing of the selection process of specialty. And how does it align with how your brain works?
hmm,
So I love when I was a medical student, I actually couldn't think of anything I loved more than emergency medicine. It was just, it was so exciting and I loved it. And even to this day, the medical aspect of emergency medicine, phenomenal. I mean, just the skills that you have in solving problems and just being fast on your feet and getting into those recesses. And the challenge that I didn't anticipate was being overwhelmed.
mhm,
Because when you're a medical student, you're protected from that. When you're a resident, you're sort of protected from that, although less and less. And the less and less I was protected from that, just thinking about this, the more stressed I became, and then the more burnt I started to
mm,
become. And when I became an attending and I worked at really busy emergency departments, it was just overwhelm all the time. And looking back and knowing myself better now, I know that I am a serial processor. I get on one thing very deeply, like this conversation. We are here, we are in line and attuned.
mm,
Great. Or writing an article or coaching or running a class. Great. When I've got 50 things to
mhm.
juggle, it's so hard. I get so stressed.
Right.
And I still do. But when I get one thing, oh, amazing. And I think a lot of people are wired that serial way, and that multitasking, all those balls in the air gets very stressful. And I think that actually contributed to burnout early in my career several times. And I did not approach it in the right way. And I think about your title as the charting coach, which gets into, I'm going to pause for a moment, but gets into another story of the wrong path that I took to try to mitigate burnout. But I will pause and see what else we got
Actually,
coming.
I'm kind of curious about the wrong path you took to mitigate burnout, because I think the lessons that we learn from others, bad, wrong, retrospective decisions can help
Yeah.
us in our current decisions about, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed here. What should I be looking for or looking out for? There could be a lesson here. So if you don't mind walking us down the wrong path for
Yeah.
you, it might help us.
No, so funny. Yeah, it was the right path, but also the wrong path. And so backing up a bit, When I was growing up, when I was in my teenage years, I taught martial arts. When I was even in high school and in college, I had the idea that maybe I would want to be a teacher, a full-time teacher, high school, college,
Mhm.
something, rather than go into medicine. But medicine had been my path for a long time. I said, I'm gonna do this thing. And so t- I I always gravitated towards teaching, and I still do. That's
Mhm.
very much a big part of my job. I know it's a big part of your job as well. And when I started to get stressed and overwhelmed in my work, and I would think this, and a lot of docs that come to both of us think like this is no longer sustainable, but just have
Mhm.
this general angst of this whole
Mhm.
thing is like, let's break it down into smaller steps and see what isn't. So for me, this is 25 years ago when I was starting out. I thought, well, this is not working out for me. So I need to find something else that works out for me. And I thought, well, I'll just teach more. And so I dedicated myself to teaching the residents that rotated through our department. I started lecturing. I started, teaching in our department. And every time I got a little bit more burnt, overwhelmed, and I was staying 4 hours late doing my charts and all those things, like, I'll just teach more.
Mhm.
And so it was the right and wrong thing. So it
Mhm.
was right in the way that it's a purpose-driven life, and it's a renewable resource,
Mhm.
that purpose-driven life. Yet it was not addressing the primary issue, which was overwhelm. The purpose does not give you the logistics and the strategy of how to not stay 4 hours over, of how to not if you're not documenting in real time. My purpose is to teach. There's this other thing that's really getting you. So not only was I overwhelmed, that overwhelm led to me not documenting in real time. Then I would finish my shifts with a stack of charts. And you and I both know that it takes twice as long to do a chart at the end than it does to do it contemporaneously. So I would say that the wrong path I took, which was the right, yet it
Mhm.
wasn't, it didn't address the problem, was falling back into my comfort zone,
Mhm.
which was education.
Yeah.
And the right move, if I was coaching myself way back when, I would have said, all right, what's going on? What's stressing you out? What's burning you out? Overwhelm, charting, and I'm getting out 4 hours after every shift. Let
Oh.
How's teaching fit into that? Oh, I love teaching. That's just the best part of my job. That's why I live to do this job. Okay, let's focus on the things that are not quite that, the staying 4 hours and the charting and the overwhelm, and build structure around what you do when you get overwhelmed, and not just hope that it's not going to be busy, because it's
Yeah.
going to be busy.
Got it. Yes. And hoping it's not going to be busy is just not a current reality for our merge docs. So gone are the days of being able to hand over an empty waiting room or arrive
Right.
to an empty waiting room. So that's just gone. It's
So
gone,
true.
at least for the moment. Um, okay. So was anyone watching your progress as a new attending saying, I notice he's still here. Didn't his shift finish hours ago? How are you doing, Rob? Checking in. Because like you had identified, the emergency department is often camaraderie. We're checking in with each other. We're kind of watching each other a little bit if you've got more than one physician on shift at a time. What was that experience for you? Was anyone looking over your shoulder, kind of checking in, seeing how you're doing?
I've never been asked that question before, and I took a note on that. And I actually I need to pause on that because I really appreciate that you put that out there, because it brings up something that I think is part of the culture of medicine, maybe the ethos or the pathologic ethos, is that we fetishize this self-sacrifice.
Mm.
And I think of course, I had friends that I would complain to, and we would ineffectively co-ruminate on all of this stuff rather than look for actual strategies. And what people would say is, so I'd be back in the doc's office for hours and hours, getting increasingly ineffective, just tired, and then surfing the internet as a way to avoid what I didn't want to do. And they would the phrase was always the same. Why are you still here?
Mm.
Why are you still here? And so that, not only was that not helpful, that also fed into imposterism,
Mm-hmm.
and that I wasn't up to snuff. And we would get the metrics for every month and how many patients per hour, your length of stay, and all this stuff. And I never fell a standard deviation below the mean.
Yep.
But if you did, you were, and I know some docs who did, and it didn't always go well for them.
Mm.
And it wasn't like there was an actual penalty for it, but I never saw or heard anyone say, "Hey, how can we help you out here?" There was a little bit of that. And there's pushback of, "Hey, I'm going to practice the way I practice." And we have such
Mm.
ego in the whole thing. But I never heard nobody. And one of the reasons was, I think, because I came across as so self-assured that,
Mm.
I mean, no one's going to ask me if I'm okay. Oh, please ask me, I guess, if I'm okay. Because I wasn't okay. I was totally not okay. I was super stressed and burning, and then
Mm-hmm.
burning on top of burning. And how does that match still burn? It's been burned 3 times. So no, I would have loved it if the docs that I looked up to, the mentors who I tried to model, I tried to see what is it that they do,
Mm-hmm.
which is hard when you're looking at the actual mindset that they have. Things like documentation are so mindset based. We think, you must just document in real time to do this. Like, but that inner critic and that imposterism and all that is actually going to thwart you from doing it. So, to your question, people did comment on it, but they didn't comment on it in a constructive way.
Right. Okay. So you had friends, you were socializing, you were kind of bantering about how awful things are at times. You're
Yeah.
doing things that give you some happiness, and you're also suffering badly.
I don't know if it gave us happiness. I think it
The
just,
teaching, the teaching a little bit happy, or just
well, there was community. I
okay.
definitely had community in the group, and we had friends, and I had a lot of docs I'd go bike riding with and hang out with and go to dinner with. It was a great community and a supportive community. But there was just a lot, everybody's complaining about their job and the things that stress them. And it was a lot of, it was just, I'd complain, they'd complain, and then we just start spinning up. And so the friendships in the community definitely brought joy. But I think that, and it was great to have people to talk to, but that very easily can become counterproductive
Mm.
when we're all just tossing logs on the fire of what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong. It takes some real intention and maybe even external guidance to turn that from just a continual complaint session into, how do we become more productive?
Mm. What was 4 hours after your shift costing you personally? Like that staying on, the being there, the being inefficient, the kind of will this ever end of the day? What did
Yeah.
that kind of look like for you in your outside of work day?
So as I think about that, what did that cost me personally? My wife was also an emergency physician, and she now does medical education full time. And she was forgiving and permissive and protected me. And we would, when I was on shift, she was with the kids. When she was on shift, I was with the kids. And so we, if however long you stayed after a shift, how long you stayed after a shift. And I, I didn't so think about at the time what it was costing me in my life. I just knew that increasingly as the years went on, I faced each shift with accumulating dread because I knew that I would be staying over. And
Mm-hmm.
then years in, each new patient, what I saw in my eyes was another chart I had to do, and
Mm-hmm.
another chart that I wasn't going to do in real time, another chart I had to do at the end. And somebody would come in for a med refill. So there's the easiest thing. It's like, hey, I need my hypertension medication refilled. I mean, this takes like 3 minutes. Oh, another chart I have to do. Really?
Mm,
Really? And so it cost me in that way. It
mm,
cost me as a vampire of joy for the job.
yeah. Yeah. Did did do you think that's that burnout piece that they talk about, that depersonalization or the disillusionment about your day when you're seeing patients as another child I got to do at the end of the shift? Is that what you now hear physicians talking about when they're talking about being burnt out?
That's some of it. It docs. So I mostly coach emergency docs as we were talking about in the beginning, and I'd say that maybe half come because of documentation issues or staying late, but not all. Some are getting out on time. And
Mm-hmm.
so I will say this, that I mean, we actually we I have a coaching partner, and we're starting a course for emergency docs, and we're calling it Out on Time. It's just, how do you get out on time in the emergency
Absolutely.
department, right? And so some do come for that, and I will say that it is so rewarding when someone reaches out like that and they're saying my career is no longer sustainable because of this. I mean, you're the charting coach. You're living this all the time, and I can see what's happening with them. And having done it with so many docs now, and done it with myself eventually in my career,
Mm-hmm.
I can see, oh, at the end of this, your life and career will be so different because that particular dread is going to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's just your experience with work will be so different. And I would say that in most docs that I work with, including the docs who have the particular challenge that I did, there is some aspect of inner criticism at play. Inner voice has to do with our inner perfectionist, our fear of judgment versus fear of failure. So there's many reasons that people come into coaching. Some
Mm-hmm.
just, I want to excel in my career. I'm doing fine. Great. Others, I'm drowning in whatever I'm drowning in. I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
to get out. So charting is some of it, overwhelm is some of it, but I
Mm-hmm.
think we all have our own flavor of what contributes to the burnout,
Yeah.
um, because we have our own strengths and our own challenges.
Mm-hmm.
My On the outside, I looked really strong because I was strong in the areas that people paid attention to and how they maybe implicitly measured what made a great ER doc. I was
Mm-hmm.
very confident in the resus bay. I got along nice with patients. I was kind. I was good at procedures, but I was inefficient. That's all get go. But no one's really paying attention to that because you can just stay at the end of your shift and do your thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did you get yourself out of that then?
Yeah,
What were the steps that you kind of stepped towards to get yourself in a different place?
it was a big step. And I I would love to have the chance to do it all over again, see how could I approach this in a way that now I coach docs to do and works for them. And yeah, so I this was about 13 years into being an attending. And I remember I was driving to work one day and just this accumulated dread is just, and every day I was driving into my shift and it was just, oh my gosh. I wasn't dreading that we could have a neonatal code or we could have a this or that or a mass casualty. I wasn't dreading any of that. I was just dreading, oh, I'm going to be overwhelmed. There's going to be so much documentation, all that. That was just every freaking time I was reliving those
Mm-hmm.
yesterdays. Remember, I was stuck in traffic driving to work and and I was late. And you don't want to be late for these emergency department shifts. And I just had this primordial scream that happens like,
Mm-hmm.
what the, what was that? And I knew that something had to change. I said, okay, that's not a positive sign that's going on.
Yeah.
And my wife and I had talked about moving to Colorado as we were
Mm-hmm.
living in another state at the time. My mom lived there. I grew up there, and it was just a small community. And I think we both wanted to slow things down as far as our clinical practice went, not just slow down what the day to day looked like.
Mhm.
And that really pushed me. So in a way, I was said, I'm going to run away from this thing. But looking back on it now, I'm really running toward
Mm.
this type of practice, which was much more aligned with how I want to practice, which was now I can take my time.
Mm.
Now there's not 7 ambulances in the ambulance bay all the time. It's sometimes you get busy, sometimes you get hammered. I don't care how rural you are, you're going to get hammered from time to time. I was I was working, I worked locums for the last several years of my career, and I was working in this tiny town, critical resource hospital. I know you've done rural emerge as well. And I can remember one time it suddenly got busy and I walked out in the waiting room and there was a line literally out the door of I don't know how many people. I thought, "Wow, everywhere you go, it happens, but just not as commonly.
Mm.
The pace is more reasonable." And once I got into that environment, then I could start looking at my habits. And these things become habits, these
Mhm.
documentation and shift flow. And then also, how am I delaying decisions? Is there a
Mhm.
decision I can make right now versus am I deferring this? Am I going to keep this patient here my whole shift because I don't want to actually make this decision
Mhm.
and procrastinate this? So because I was able to slow down, I could look at what am I doing with documentation? What am I doing with decisions? What am I delaying that I don't need to delay? How am I interacting with people when I'm stressed? Because when those charts start collecting, your bandwidth shrinks, your resilience diminishes, and you get a lot shorter and you just don't have as much patience. So slowing that down gave time for reflection. And then I started to change my habits and say, oh, you know what? I am someone who documents in real time. I am someone who makes decisions and doesn't defer decisions. I am someone who takes my time yet is efficient and effective. And you can't just say that. You have to build in pathways and processes of it's almost like implementation intentions. If this happens, then I will do this. If
Mhm.
this happens,
Mhm.
then I will do this. And building that up over several years changed my entire experience with medical practice, much, much for the better.
Yeah, yeah. Was there any change in how you would approach the other staff within the shift as you made these changes out of dreading the shift into creating a shift that was more manageable, flowed better?
I don't know.
Okay.
There's one thing that I did do as you ask. I don't know how I engaged with the other staff. I'd have to ask them. Uh, but one thing I did do was make a concerted effort that when any new doc came into the group, that the first thing I told them was, this year is your fellowship. This is your fellowship in clinical medicine. You get all this residency training on how to practice medicine, but you haven't yet learned how to be an attending. So we're
Mhm.
going to work on communication with consultants, on documentation. I want you to just bring cases to me so we can discuss it and we can help you figure out how to do the things that you want to do and the ways you want to do them and get home on time and all that. And
Mhm.
so your fellowship is just figuring out your practice and setting those good habits. So I'd say that was really what I noticed because that was something that I felt I didn't have direct mentorship
Mm.
when I started out. I said, okay, I am whether they like it or not, they're going to get mentorship. And it was a small ED. We had 9 docs or something, and so it was very easy to do that, and we all got along. I'm still friends with all those folks now, and that was the biggest change. And as I hadn't thought about this, but I think that probably evolved into what I'm doing now. I mean, I wasn't certified as a coach
Mhm.
15 years ago or whatever when that was happening. or really understand the methodology of doing it. But and I guess that did then become aligned with the purpose of teaching and elevating experience. So to your original question, I'm not sure about engagement with staff, but I am sure about the action that I took.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that we notice that as we help others problem solve, we're like, oh, that could help me too. Right? That whole mentorship of others is super valuable because you're like watching them and you're like, but if you did it that way, wouldn't that be easier? Oh yeah, I should probably watch my own shoulders too. Watch over my own shoulder and kind
Yeah.
of be curious about how things are going. I guess I'm thankful to my original emergency department team when I was an intern and first years of residency, because they were also 9 strong
Mhm.
emergency department critical care ICU physicians, and they would kind of put you under their wing and teach you kind of the decision making and the flow of the day.
Yeah.
And then you'd see one or two of them sitting there doing their charts at the end, and you'd be like, I don't want to do that. Kind of this modeling of what I don't want and what I do want.
Oh,
Yeah.
so the model, when you're talking about modeling, I love that. So you're thinking, how do I want to be? How do I want to act? When I was in training, we modeled the behavior of finishing all of our charts at the end of the day. That was
Wow.
what we did. Very
Wow.
few people did them in real time, and that still happens.
Mm-hmm.
People think, I can't let that patient wait another minute while I do this chart. And that mindset and that ethos just gets hammered into you. Yeah. And
Fascinating. Fascinating. Because
modeling.
my guys, they were off to the football field straight after their shift. There's ain't no hanging around like 1 minute after the clock finished. They're like, bye, bye all. And then
Yeah.
swagger out and be like, I got to be faster at this.
Now, was
This
that
is not good.
football as in soccer, football as in footy, or what kind of football?
Footy. Yeah,
What
footy. Footy,
Australian rules
cricket,
football.
rugby, whatever was going,
Yeah.
because it was that small community. They got places to be, right? So shift finishes, you're out the door. That was what was modeled behavior where I came from.
Mm,
And you'd have the one at the end of the long desk who was kind of sitting there with a pile of charts, and we're like, because he'd taken on like a lot of patients through the day. So he'd sit there scribbling his charts for an hour after his shift, but everyone else had gone.
mm, yeah.
And if you were still there, you were like, I got to get this done faster. I got to do this differently tomorrow. It wasn't
So
a,
then did you look at how they structured their shifts and their behaviors in the shifts to model your own behavior?
we did. And I think that was helpful in that context. And then in family medicine, it all went to a different story. And then those bad habits came back to the emerge and followed me. So yeah, my trajectory did not stay in this good, successful
Mm,
clinical day habits. I
yeah.
created my own disasters in my wake. Hmm. All right. So now you've moved and transitioned out of the emergent. Now you're doing some of that medical education. Does that go well? How does that work for you as you're starting to do that for you
Oh yeah.
within?
So I started podcasting actually with my brother in 2006, I think, when there were very few podcasts in existence, and did it with him for many years. It's a non-medical related thing. I thought, I could do a medical podcast. There was only one other free medical podcast on iTunes, I think. And I said, oh, I can do that. So I started doing it and I loved it. And I just, I was doing it as I guess as an avocation or a
Mhm.
hobby. And the the thing I started doing was curbside consults. I wanted to talk with specialists about how they think about problems that we call them about from the emergency department. So, hey, urologist, when I call you a patient who has just gross hematuria, what is it that you're thinking? What do you want for
Mm,
that workup? What am I not reading in the textbook? So it was all curbside consults.
mm,
And then I very quickly got associated with a medical education company. So then started doing it professionally and more and more and more professionally. It was awesome. I loved every second of it. It was so fun. It's interesting that my reach started to increase, yet the what I was doing, which is just sitting at this computer and creating things and interviewing and recording and researching, did not change one iota. And I really enjoyed that. All of the medical education aspects because it so aligned with my purpose,
Mm-hmm.
which was teaching or sparking understanding in others. Not that I made up the information, but can I turn it into a usable nugget and help translate it?
Mm-hmm.
And so that went really well. And when I stopped clinical medicine and went into medical education full time, it was still going great. And I was kind of surfing the wave of, oh my gosh, are you serious? I get to wake up every day and do this?
Mm-hmm.
Really? But then what happened is a couple years into that, I realized that I did not have that push of every shift coming up with questions and uncertainties and feel a little bit of that stress and was also not in the thick of it knowing what the questions would be. And I remember I was interviewing someone about uh, a different way to think about rapid sequence intubation. And I went back and I was listening to that because you do QA on your
Mm-hmm.
podcast. And I thought, oh gosh, I didn't ask this, I didn't ask this, I didn't ask this. Not that the podcast was bad, but it wasn't great
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't in it and I wasn't intubating every day or every couple of days thinking, oh yeah, what is my stress point? Let me just picture myself in here. I'd kind of lost that edge. And I thought, I could do this. I could be a clinical educator in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. I could do it today, but I did not feel authentic doing it. And I I just felt I felt like it was decreasingly fulfilling because I myself was not in that situation, kind of solving my own problems, I
Mm-hmm.
guess was the thing that drove me in medical education.
Yeah.
And then I thought, I think I want to shift careers. I think I want to get into something else. And so medical education, I just kind of evolved into, but what I'm doing now was a 100% a deliberate choice of, okay, now I
Mm-hmm.
get to make a trade and I get to decide what I want to do. There's a lot of exploration and the like, but I'm not, did that answer
Mm-hmm.
what you're getting at with the medical education?
Yeah, absolutely. So medical education was something that you were passionate about, enjoying. It gave you answers to questions you had. It was bringing knowledge and turning it into something that somebody else could find useful.
Yeah.
And that I can see your passion there and the reasons you might have decided to leave that very helpful. Yeah. So now tell us about physicians coming into your orbit who
Yeah.
are in this new and ever-changing environment. Emergency department is different from how it has previously been. Even in our rural country town, we might have been able to sleep after midnight, and not anymore. Most of the time it's an all-nighter, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a different game. Tell us what you're noticing, what they're coming in with, and the things that are helpful that tend to end up creating change.
Well, yeah, that's a lot. So I think that emergency medicine post-COVID is very different than it was
Mm-hmm.
pre-COVID. It's more intense. It is busier. Some docs feel like they have less support
Mm-hmm.
systemically than they did before. And before, trust me, people, as you and I know, they felt like they did not have a ton of support. That maybe patients can be a little bit more difficult. And who knows what's what as far as having just less bandwidth and less resilience on these shifts because you're just tired and you're getting hammered all the time. And in the US, we have these things called contract management groups and these giant emergency medicine groups where you'll have one doc and one APP covering a 30 or 40 bed emergency department and just stress kind of, hey, we've got to make profits for our shareholders. And, we've got to just have the minimum possible coverage. And we're finding that that's not the most effective thing. So there's all
Mm-hmm.
these different aspects which have culminated to make emergency medicine in particular, and that's where my lens is, harder. And on the best day, even before all that, the practice of emergency medicine is difficult physically, emotionally, spiritually. It's just hard and draining. You finish a shift of that, and you are wiped,
Mhm.
just so tired, and you need recovery. And working a lot of days, you have less room for recovery, and so on and so on. So many docs come because they are just feeling burnt. And you have that sensation, okay, there's the cynicism, the depersonalization, all of the things that, all right, here's the answers you get from the burnout inventory. But really it's kind of, hey, I've lost that love and feeling for medicine. And I don't know how much longer I can do this.
Mhm.
Okay, let's take a look at that. Let's take a
Mhm.
look what that looks like. So for many, it's interesting for many docs when we get into what's going on with your current job. What would you like your job to look like? What are things within your control to
Mhm.
bridge that gap? And let's get to work. Almost, I'd say over half the time, and it's used to surprise me, it doesn't surprise me so much anymore. The first coaching session has to deal with the personal domain, with family and fitness and health. And I think that, okay. Am I coming through this mic okay? My
Yep.
mic just turned off and I turned it back on. So when we're looking at burnout, or we're looking at the things that we can change, if you've kind of got a pyramid of where you have agency versus the impact on your career. So at the
Mhm.
very bottom of the pyramid, you've got the personal domain, which is where people start because I've got full agency here. I
Mhm.
can, schedule dates with my significant other. I can schedule time for exercise. I can protect this time. I can put up boundaries, full agency. Then you go up to the professional domain. What is it that I'm doing at work? How am I managing those periods of mid-shift overwhelm? How am I engaging with leadership? How am I managing this coach? What happens when I get into the resus bay? What's my mindset? What's my communication? How am I doing my charts? All the professional domain. So you have full 100% agency in the personal domain, a little less in the professional domain, although it most certainly impacts your career. And then you've got the very top of the pyramid, the system, where the real change needs to be made, but you have much less agency.
Yep.
And when there are supportive systems, people feel supported. Most systems are not that way. And I find that almost all the work I do with clients and what they come for is personal and professional. And it is in response to the system.
Yep.
Sometimes we do work on the system, and I have clients who have made massive changes in their
Mhm.
system. Some of them are physician leaders. Some of them think, I have so much moral injury from what's going on right now. I cannot sustain this. So I'm going to engage with the system to try to make these changes. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. There's most certainly ways to do that effectively and ineffectively, as you know. I think a lot of docs think they can just go into the CMO's office and say, this is how it has to be. You just can't do that anymore. Um, so it is, I think there's a really common refrain as I'm thinking about this, that is this what I signed up for? Is this what I spent all those years in college and med school and residency and so much self-sacrifice to get to this? And it's because you learn all the medicine, but you don't learn the tools of how to navigate this system effectively. No one teaches a trainee how to effectively have shift endurance so
Mhm.
that you can last during your shift. How do you conserve energy? How do you focus energy when it's needed? And then how do you chill when it's not? Because we're just in this sympathetically activated state all the time. And our shoulders just kind of get up in our ears. It's just that simple thing of how do you manage tension and relaxation during your day?
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just something so simple as that. We're not taught that. And that can, I think sometimes that can be looked at askance of, it's kind of woo woo and you, not super useful. But when you start doing it, whoa, my experience at work changes dramatically.
Yeah. I like this shift to sustainability, like your ability to last out the shift, considering the human physiology. And
Yeah.
agree, it's not necessarily where you consider, but when you pause and hydrate, your brain starts working again. You're like, whoa. Or you're trying to make a decision, you're like, oh, my bladder is interfering with my decision making. Got it. It's it sounds woo because um I think partly emergency physicians are those they want it, they want to flow, they want those patients seen, they want to be getting through the numbers, they want to be helping, and so they do put aside, we put down that push away thirst and hunger and tired and fatigued to go. It's got that. I don't know if it's the culture, how we're trained, just the way we're taught to think in emergency medicine. I'm not quite sure where it's coming from, but it's certainly it does sound woo when you're like, but you're important too.
Well, let me, so as you're saying that, I'm thinking of the anti-woo. So imagine that you told your friend who was a lawyer that, hey, so I get to work and I immediately have 8 patients to see, and I'm going to work for 12 hours. And during that time, I won't eat, I won't drink, I won't pee, I won't take a break. And then I'll give myself 4 hours of extra work on the end of the day for the things that I didn't do during the day. And that's normal. I mean, what are you, crazy? Nobody's going to work like that. We think, oh yeah, it just kind of creeps in that that's how we do.
Yeah. And we might not pay for the last 4 hours, just for extra fun.
Yes, right. Which very, very few get paid for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, this is good. So we've got some ideas for change is possible, even when the system stays the same. And there are many things within your ability to change. And it's possible. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing, the threads of the current workings on this emergency department situation.
Yeah, it's agency can be found in many places in
Mm,
a career. So, for example, well, I had a client come for coaching because they were so fed up that nobody was grateful. There was no
mm,
thanks in
mm,
the job. Nobody's thanking anybody. Like, well, there's no agency there. I mean, you can't make people thank you. And this is something I learned from my coaching mentor many years ago. Was what if you started your shift by saying to yourself, I'm open to accepting gratitude from my patients, and really keeping an eye out for when gratitude bubbles up or when it comes, because it just kind of comes in passing. And you're usually, talking about documentation, you're usually doing your documentation, someone thanks you, and versus, oh, hang on for a sec, let me finish this and chat with you. Yes, and then you have this interaction, and it's so much more fulfilling for you, so much more fulfilling for them, versus then kind of being blown off that engagement. Or somebody says it in a room and said, "Thank you so much, doc. You're welcome." It was nothing for them. It's probably the biggest thing in their life. You're welcome. It was a real pleasure taking care of you. If anything gets worse, please come back. We are always here, but I hope I don't see you again. And just that changes their experience with the medical system, that someone is listening, changes what you're receiving on the job. So, and for her, it completely changed and revitalized her career, just that one little thing.
Mhm,
And then she just started doing that, telling everybody about it, and changed the culture in her department to one where, okay, we're just going to be open to receiving gratitude. And when we hear it, we're going to let somebody else know if they've got gratitude.
mhm,
And so you think, well, there's a place where I don't have any agency, but
mm,
you do, because you're acting in a way that is worthy of gratitude and you're open to receiving it. You have no control over what they're going to do, only what you do. So I have control over if I'm going to attend to that, and then how I act. Same thing with documentation. I can't get all my charts done. It's too busy. What we can start breaking that down and working small and thinking,
Mhm.
where does that mindset come from? I can shift my mindset on that. So these things seem impossible, but are absolutely doable. But that's why what you and I do is, one is we help docs hear themselves that, oh, let's just, and not hear themselves with, wow, here's this crazy idea, but let's get your ideas out there and see what might work, and slow it down and break down I think where the real work comes in managing burnout is you have this nebulous idea or this nebulous feeling of angst and dread. All right, so let's take that and turn it into small steps, and those smaller steps and small steps and smaller steps and small steps, and then those into specific actions. And then you're moving forward. And then you are taking actions to do it. And then you have accountability, because that's so easy to just slip. You're talking about when you got out of the training and say, oh, these other habits came up. Probably no one was keeping you accountable for the things you were doing. We get out into the wild and we're all on our own, and nobody's looking over our shoulder asking us how we're doing.
Yeah, yeah. Even just examining our story about our day, like when you were in the car, in traffic, dreading work, that's all in your head. But when you start to explain, what is it about this shift? What's your story or thoughts about this shift? If you start to put that down, like all the things you're thinking about your shift, you can suddenly notice what you're noticing about your shift. You're like, oh, I noticed that. I never think this is going to go well. Huh, it's probably not going to go well. Right? That I'm going to be 4 hours late. And so with you're exactly what you said. You're looking for evidence for how it's going to be terrible and how you're going to be 4 hours late. And then just tweaking it to say, I wonder if I'll I have any thanks within my day. And start looking for that too. It is magic and it's science, but it's just so cool. It's just so cool.
Let's call it magical science.
Magical science.
Yeah.
So fun. It's so fun. And you're right. Little teeny tiny steps. It's not because we always, I think I've noticed this about physicians. We want it better tomorrow. We want the biggest step. We want to go from not documenting anything to all my charts are done tomorrow. Right? It's that I want a complete 180 degrees version of me turning up tomorrow. It's like, no. Let's just work on, get your water and look for things. Great.
I mean, you have described the mindset perfectly. That's got to be. It's reminds me of what's that movie? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once,
All at
right
once.
now.
That's right. And right now.
Yes.
We can't, but it feels like it feels like, I think when I'm in the middle of it, it feels like nothing's ever going to change. I'm so overwhelmed by this. I just need it immediately better. I cannot do another day like this. Like you were saying, it's my yesterday again. And you did 13 years of this. Like that's impressive amount of punishment.
It's funny when you say that. Yeah, I want all the things changed right now. But when you make that one micro change, if trying to change everything at once happens, not going to change. You make that one micro change, it is such a dramatic change of shift experience that it's as if everything changed all at once. And then you build on that and build on that. So, whoa, work can be like this. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And a little unbelievable. Where do people find you if they're looking to work with you?
People find me at roborman.com. This is my name, ROBORMAN, roborman.com. And we've got the podcast, and you see it behind the peace lily here, Stimulus. That's probably the easiest place to find me. Got a newsletter, run a couple courses. Flameproof is our anti-burnout course, 6 months online. It's pretty intensive. We take small cohorts through that, and then we've got Out on Time starting. It's all on my website where they can access that.
Wonderful. And anything we didn't talk about that you want to make mention of?
Whoa. I think there's probably a lot of stuff, but I think we covered some good ground today.
Perfect. Right. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. And I'm sure people listening will have, even one or two little things you heard that you could start doing immediately. Low-hanging fruit, make it tiny, tiny steps. Go change your world.
Oh, Sarah, it was such a delight chatting with you. Thanks for
Thank
having me
you.
on the show.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone. If you are here and you are a resident, I want to remind you that we have a program called the Smarter Charting Program, which is there to help you as you navigate these changing workplaces, changing work flow or amount of work that you're doing, the different preceptors you're working for, and their different expectations, patient expectations. Smarter Charting Program is our program that's been running for clinicians, and now we're accepting residents into that as well, because a lot of what you're working through in those years as a resident, we understand as preceptors the types of things that you are dealing with, and we would love to be able to help you. Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.